The Atlantic salmon is facing its worst return this year because of the striped bass. The striped bass's numbers have been going up because of the DFO's actions in deciding to put a moratorium on the commercial fishing of striped bass back in the year 2000. That being said, it went up exponentially. What was only 5,000 fish is now in a couple of millions. We're looking at the worst return for Atlantic salmon this year and what possibly could be the decline and collapse of the species in most parts of the river. This is not to say that there isn't a collection or gene banking or hatcheries in place. As we've seen today, there's many salmon. They're just not allowed back in the waters. This is Jared Durrell, and welcome to New Brunswick.
So the importance with recording and talking about the preservation of salmon with its worst expected return this year is really focusing on how communities are interconnected and rely on these resources. Although salmon is seen more as a recreational fish and not something totally relied on to feed people, it still shows off how a resource is disappearing because of the actions of government and how those actions aren't seen as transparent and have segregated communities. These communities from Burnt Church to the greater Miramichi Valley aren't aware of their neighbor, and they practice an ethical not in my backyard where they really are disconnected from people living in the same area. Focusing on how Irving and Cook have been funding the MSA's updates, and the MSA admittedly is working through the CAST program, is now experiencing difficulties with the DFO, and the DFO is not being transparent with anyone. We're seeing that there's a major disconnect popping up in between not-for-profits that run groups that connect communities and the government that polices these communities. With a disconnect like this and a resource starting to disappear, much is left uncertain. Moving forward, the only things we can know for sure is that with the population on the decline and a bunch of salmon being housed privately and not allowed back in the river, the salmon isn't extinct yet, thank God. But the population is now in a major turning point where it's either we can deposit these back into the river and knowing who will have access to them, or these GMO fish are going to be kept in-house and won't be allowed to access the river again. And there's nothing left except for uncertainty, for the riverways and the population are always changing. With an effluent center on the uprise, after a $1 million punitive damage deal between the government and Irving's, there is a sense that we have to be responsible. But the power is not given to the people in this responsibility. This responsibility is being privatized and handled like a system where you just have to expect and hope for the best. And then if it goes wrong, rely on others. Now, we're waiting to see if the power does go back to the people. The power to travel, the power to live, the power to love, the power to just rely on your environment to feed and foster your family, your friends, and your fellow man.